My name's Cody Maxwell, Fannin County Extension Agent for Agriculture and Natural Resources. And today we're going to be talking about management considerations for cows in the fall. Specifically, this information that we're going to talk about today is really going to be geared towards those spring calving cow herds. But a lot of the applications are going to also be for your fall calving cow herds that you'll have as well. But right now, for in the time frame that we're in, we'll specifically be talking about those spring calving cow herds. And then again next spring, we could give this same exact presentation again to talk about those fall calvers. So hopefully this information that we'll go over today is going to be beneficial for you. And those management decisions that you're going to have to make, or that you may have already made over the last couple of weeks. But a lot of our spring calvers, as we talked about, calve February to April here in the county. And so weaning season is right around the corner, if not right now. And so with weaning season comes these management considerations that we have to talk about with these cows. Some of them are easy to discuss and figure out. Some of them are tough. Some of them are tough decisions that we have to make. And so hopefully this information is going to be helpful for you. So the four things that we're going to go over today, we're going to talk about establishing a calving season. We'll kind of breeze through that pretty good. And then we're going to get into talking about the pregnancy checking or testing techniques that you can do on these cows that you have. And then from those results, management decisions based on the pregnancy status of that cow and the age of that cow too. And then we'll talk about your options moving forward from there and how to best make these decisions. So we'll go through these all in detail today. So first thing, whenever you're looking at considerations for a calving season, and some of you might have heard some of this information before, but for those of you that hadn't, the first thing that we want to discuss is, when do we want to calve? Do we want to calve in the spring? Do we want to calve in the fall? Do we want to be a winter calver? That's kind of the seasons that we want to consider. We do have some people that calve during the summer. Here in our area, we're gonna it's an option for you, but we're gonna discourage you from trying to calve during the summer months. The reason being is it just gets so hot here during the summer months. Cows, they want to spend their time in the shade, or they want to spend their time out in one of our stock tanks. It just makes it a lot more difficult on them with the heat, with the humidity. We get into those drought-like months and trying to grow grass and stuff too. It's just real difficult for that cow to support herself and a calf in the first 90 days of lactation, not to mention getting that cow bred back too. And so a lot of things to consider right there for calving during the summer. So we're going to discourage you from doing that. So when we look at when we're wanting to calve, right here for our area in Fannin County, this North Texas region, Northeast Texas region, fall calving works well. Calving in the winter works well. And then spring calving is probably going to be what you're going to see most producers do. Typically about 80% of our cow herd here in the North Texas region is going to be a spring calving cow herd. Whenever we get into our winter and our fall calving months, obviously with the winter, we don't know what the weather's going to be like. And some people simply don't like to get out and check cows that are calving during the cold and the short days. Some people like to calve in the fall. They might want to take advantage of a time to sell those calves. Typically when we're not flooding the market as we are in the fall and the winter with those spring calving cows. And so we've got to determine when we want to calve when developing a calving season. And obviously there's advantages and disadvantages to different times of the year. I talked about the disadvantages to calving during the summer. Talked about the disadvantages to calving during the winter, basically just looking at the weather right there. I think whenever we look at our fall and our winter calving, if we've got good hay, and if we come in there and plant a winter pasture, I think sometimes we tend to see those fall and winter calving calves tend to wean off just a little bit heavier than our spring calving cows or calves, mainly for the reason of just the the grass. Uh, again, those drought-like conditions, and fortunately this year we haven't had to deal with it. But typically, we all know what July, August, September, first part of October looks like in our area. It doesn't look like it does right now. We're usually not this lush and not this green around, and so we typically don't have the forage available that we could if we come in there and plant winter pastures for those fall and winter calving cows. So obviously, there's advantages and disadvantages each time of the year. Fact of the matter, we want to determine what our calving season is going to be as we start the presentation here and move on towards other things that we're going to talk about. So here's just a chart for you. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on here, but basically what we're looking at is on the left-hand side of the column, bull turnout or AI. This is when we expect to do this, and so if you turn out or AI December the 1st, you're going to be looking at September the 9th calving day. So that's going to put you in that fall calving time frame. You move on down to the March the 1st bull turnout or AI. That's going to put you December the 8th for an expected starting calving day. So that's going to put you in that winter time frame. Then you move down to May the 1st, and then that moves you into a February 7th expected calving date, which is going to put you in that spring calving interval. And one thing about these presentations, if you'd like a copy of it, send me an email. We'll get that over to you and make that available. Ideal calving season. So the length of our calving season ideally should be 80 days long. So how this maps out for the year is we want that cow, if she's pregnant for 285 days, that allows us to calve for 80 days, and then we turn the bulls in for 80 days, and that gives us a 365 day a year that we have for this cow to be around and operate for. So a lot of people are going to use that 90-day calving season. It's fine. It's just in the publications and research that we have available for you. The ideal calving season is going to be 80 days. If you can get it down to 60 days, by all means, that's even better. Typically, we don't want to go much less than that 60 days, but 80 days is going to be the target you're looking for. 90 days if you have to on there. These next two charts that I'm going to show you, there's a lot going on them, but I'm going to explain them to you. But it's something that we really need to take into consideration when thinking about getting ourselves a calving season. So this was some research that was done back in 1973. You can see down there at the bottom. So what they did was they took a group of calves in 20 different day calving intervals, and this was over a 120-day calving season. So the calves that were born in the first 20 days, there were 77 of them. The average weaning weight of these calves was 443 pounds, and their average daily gain was 1.76 pounds per gain per day. You move down into that next 20 days. The calves that were born in the next 20 days of that 120-day calving season, there was 264 of them. Average weaning weight of those, 432 pounds. Average daily gain, we didn't drop off hardly any at all right there. Then you move down into the next 20 days of this 120-day calving season. A lot of them born there, 244. Weaning weight didn't change at all. So there's no variation between calves that are born in 40 to 60 days of this 120-day calving season. We actually had an increase of our average daily gain from up to 1.78. Then we start moving into this final 60 days of this 120-day calving season. Those that were born in that 80-day interval right there, average weaning weight 409 pounds. So we have dropped off a significant amount from those calves that were born in the first 20 days. You move down into those calves that was born around day 100 of this 120-day calving season. They drop off even more. And then you get down to the tail end of those calves born in the calving season. They drop off down to 375 pounds of a weaning weight. So again, a lot going on right here. But what this tells us is the more calves that we can have born on the front end of that calving season, the higher our average weaning weight's going to be, and the better our average daily gain is going to be. So again, I'm setting the stage for stuff we're going to talk about here in a little bit. And the take home of this slide right here is, when establishing a calving season, if we can have that calving season at 80 or 90 days, and majority of those cattle, 60% of them per se, being on the front end of that, we're going to have higher weaning weights, is what this chart tells us right here. This next chart, so the bar graph on the left is your 5-month calving season that you're going to see. And we start in March and we end in July on this calving season. You drop down there below the first bar chart, and you see the average weaning weight of the calf, or weaning age of the calves. So our front end calves are going to be weaned at 8 months. Our tail end calves are weaned at 4 months. That front end group of calves weaned off at 560 pounds. The back end of the calves weaned off at 320 pounds. I mean, this is over 200 pounds different in our weaning weight of those calves born on the front end, calves on the back end. So what that did is and I want you to transition over to our second bar chart right there. You see the calves that were 7, 8 months old, average weaning weight on those calves is 542 pounds. And so you go back over, if we can have majority of our calves born right there in that first 30, 60 days of the calving season, we're going to wean calves off that are better than 100 pounds more than if we have this strung out calving season. Well, what does that do? Well, that's dollars in our pocket. And so that's what it all boils down to. If we can tighten that calving season down, get majority of them up on the front end, we're going to have an average higher weaning weight, and it'll equate to more money in our pocket. So I just wanted to show you these charts as we move forward here. So moving into helping us develop our management considerations on these cows during this time of the year, it all starts with the pregnancy check on these cows, our pregnancy test. So we're going to talk about the different options that you have available here. So this is the kind of the go-to one, I would say, that we see most of our producers use around the county. And it's going to be a rectal palpation that's done on these cows. And so what you're going to have is a vet that goes in there, and they'll check these cows to determine how far along in the stage of pregnancy this cow is. And so what they're feeling for in there is they're feeling for the size of this calf. And obviously it can be very small to large, depending on when you get these cows pregnancy tested. It kind of helps too. It makes things go just a little bit quicker, and when we know the bull turnout dates. And so when you're controlling that calving season, for instance, if you're using an 80-day calving season, you can tell your vet when he shows up or she shows up, hey, I turned in bulls this day, I pulled bulls on this day. That gives them a range to kind of know, how far along those cows should be, and to know what size of calf they are to be feeling for inside of there. Whenever we have more than 120 days, 150 days of a calving season, whenever we get into that 365-day calving season, and what we're trying to do here is help you get down to a controlled calving season. Whenever we get into those larger expanded calving season, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for the person that's pregnancy testing these cows or pregnancy checking them to be able to determine, because they're going to be all across the board. The one thing that you'll like about the rectal palpation that we see here is you get an instant determination of the pregnancy status of these cows. Many times what we like to do is try to, and again, we can do this whenever we wean the calves. I know if you think a couple of weeks back on our presentation, we talked about on the day that you wean calves, only strip the calves. Well, that's all you want to do with the calves. While you have these cows up and you have some day labor available, it might be a little more convenient for you to go ahead and get these cows pregnancy tested while you're doing everything. You got everything up there all at one time. So we like to try to line that up around if you're going to be culling those cows around a sale day. And so check with your local auctions, find out when the sales are going to be, and then try to line the day you pregnancy test these cows up on a day before a sale. That way you've got them all up. You can go ahead and load up them cull cows, those that may be open. We'll talk more about that here in just a little bit. You can go ahead and load them up and go ahead and haul them on to the sale. And so the instant determination of this is the kind of the likability that we'll see with this. Price-wise, you know, as long as you're not only doing a few cows at a time, if you're only doing a few cows at a time, you're probably going to get hit with a minimum charge. You know, when coming out and working cows, you know, it's price per head basis or minimum charge. It all depends on how many cows you have available for your vet to come out and do. But for the most part, what we see is this price is going to be about $3 to $8 a head, depending on your situation and the amount of cows that you have available. So again, cost is really nothing on this. It's not much at all when you value what it's going to cost you later on that we'll talk about. The next pregnancy test that we'll look at is a blood test. And this is how it's done here. The tail's lifted. You go up underneath the tail. There's going to be a vein up in there, and you'll draw blood out of that vein right there. Cost on it is going to be your lab fee, which will be $5. You can blood test them yourself. This is something that you can do yourself if you feel comfortable doing it, and then you'll just need to get the blood samples to a lab. You're going to want blood vials or test tubes to be able to put this blood in to store it, to get it over to the lab. If you don't feel comfortable doing this, there's people around that can draw blood for you. Obviously, that's going to increase the cost on this, but just for the lab blood test, you're looking at $5. It takes about 1 to 2 days to get the results whenever you do get the blood to the lab. We've got a lab that's pretty close to us right here in Fannin County over in Tioga, so it's a close drive over there. So if you can take the blood that day, your turnaround time is going to be 1 to 2 days. The disadvantage of the blood test is if you have all those cows up while you're weaning calves, you're going to have to wait and get them up again to know the pregnancy status if there's going to be any of those that you cull. So that's the downside to the blood test if you have everything up and you're wanting to go ahead and get those cows moved if you have any that are open. The other downside is you're just getting a positive or negative blood test here. You're just going to be told, are they pregnant or are they not? You're not going to get a stage of pregnancy. So if you're wanting to know stage of pregnancy on these cows, or if you're wanting to cull these cows down to a controlled calving season, you're probably going to want to go more with the ultrasound that we'll talk about in a minute, or the rectal palpation by the vet rather than this. This is one thing, however, though, if you're doing AI on your cattle, blood test may be your best friend, because we're trying to determine a pregnancy as quick as we can on these cows. If you're just utilizing AI and not using a cover bull, we can go in there and blood test, and we can determine a positive pregnancy test at 28 days on these cows. Going back to the palpation, usually about 45 days is how far along we're going to need these cows to be bred to be able to determine a pregnancy status. So a blood test can tell you much quicker. So if you're wanting earlier results in the stage of pregnancy, a blood test is going to be able to tell you at 28 days. What you can do if you're AIing, and that's all you're utilizing, not using a cover bull or anything, you can come in there 28 days post AI blood test, and if you're working with your AI technician, once you find out the pregnancy status, if there's any that come back open, you can immediately set those cows right back up, and we can keep a controlled calving season with AI by utilizing the blood test. And then the next one, I just mentioned it a little bit ago, is going to be the ultrasound. And this is going to be where we actually go in with the ultrasound machine, typically rectally on these cows, and we'll have the ultrasound in there. and be able to determine the stage of pregnancy on this cow. This is going to be one that we're going to get pretty close to exact information on these cows. If you're using the ultrasound, and you can see we can determine a pregnancy pretty early on with the ultrasound as well as we can the blood test. Typically going to be one of your more expensive ways to pregnancy check these cows because of the cost of the technology that we're using there. These ultrasound machines are really expensive, and so typically it's going to be our more expensive cost. Roughly $8 to $10 is what we're going to see. And there again on this, you know, depending on the amount of cows that you're getting pregnancy tested or pregnancy checked, will probably determine that price. Usually if you're less than 10 cows, we're going to see that price go over $10. You get more than about 20 cows, and whenever you're doing this, and you can kind of see that price maybe start coming down. Another one, if you're using AI and you're wanting to determine an early pregnancy, this is one to utilize if you're not going to do a blood test. Another thing, if we're doing embryo transfer and using recip cows, this is another one. If you're running all your cows through your chute, you can determine which ones actually took to the embryo transfer too with the ultrasound. So another good way to utilize this. So that's on our different options that we have when it comes down to determining the pregnancy status on these cows. Now, once we know it, here's where we're going to get into the meat of the discussion here today. Once we know the pregnancy status on these cows, now we've got a decision to make. Are we going to keep them, or are we going to cull them? So we go all the way back to one of them first slides that I showed you. And if everything's bred, which typically what we're going to see, if you've got a mature cow herd, you're usually going to have about 90% of those cows that are going to be bred when you do this. Typically, our open status is going to be right around 10%. When we get into those first calf heifers, we'll tend to see that drop down even a little bit more than a 90%. We may get down into that 75, 80%. If we can get higher than that, obviously that's great. But typically we'll see that number drop off a little bit with those first calf heifers. So when we're looking at determining a calving season, and we have, say, 90% of these cows that are bred, but we've left the bulls in for, say, 150 days. If we're wanting to get down to that 80, 90-day calving season, you know, we want to look at our numbers of cows that fall within that. And we don't want to try to build Rome in a day, you know, the old saying that we have there. If we're at 150-day calving season, we may want to back down this year down to 120-day calving season. And then the next year, whenever we come in there and pregnancy check those cows, then we may take it down to 90 days after that. We probably don't want to go straight from 150 down to 90, because we may end up culling more cows than we intend to. But we want to take those things into consideration. Obviously, if a cow's open, and that's part of this presentation too that I'll talk about here in a little bit. If a cow's open, she's got to go on down the road. I'll talk about the dollars, how that looks here in just a little bit. Other things we'll talk about is the age of the cow, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But once we determine the pregnancy status of this cow, then we've got to make the decision right there. Are we going to keep her, or is she going on down the road and going to be a cull cow? And that's the terminology that we use whenever keeping or culling these cows. If we're going to send them on down the road or sell them, we'll use the word cull. And then obviously if we're going to keep them, we'll keep them there. So reasons to cull these cows. Check your cows over real good. Other than the pregnancy status of these cows, here's some other things that we want to consider. As cows tend to get a little older, get some age on them, you're going to see things happen in the photos that I've got here for you. The top picture, we've got some feet conditions that's going on with this cow here. We see her hooves turning. Obviously, this is going to make it difficult for this cow to get around whenever she's got bad hooves like this. So it's a reason to consider culling a cow. You know, structural correctness is a big deal that we want to look at on these cattle. You know, one thing structurally, they're going to pass that on down to their calves, and so structure wise, and we're talking about feet, we're talking about the angularity of the shoulder, we're talking about the straightness of the legs. You get back behind them, you know, we can get into cowhock issues. All of those things can be passed on down. And so when cows have structural issues, that's one thing that we want to look at. And I don't have pictures on this particular slide to show you just for the feet there in this case. But look at them over structurally. If they've got issues, it may be a reason to cull them. If it's issues that inhibit them to be able to move around, if it's causing them to lay down, they're not getting up, they're grazing, if it's going to cause them to lack in body condition, it's things that we need to consider as far as do we keep her or do we cull her. Age. So we can age cows by their teeth, by their mouth. And so something whenever you get these cows up in your pregnancy checking these cows, if you don't know the age of your cows, have your veterinarian go up there and age these cows for you. There's a term that we use called the broke mouth cow or a smooth mouth cow. So as you look at the pictures, the picture with the arrow right there, the red arrow on it, that's going to be a broke mouth cow, and that arrow is pointing to a tooth that she's actually missing right there. You move over to the figure 10 right there, and you've got a smooth mouth cow. This cow don't have any teeth. So when we get into looking at the body condition of these cows, the ability for them to maintain themselves on being a foraging animal, and that's what a cow is. Their main source in their diet is going to be forage. So we've got to have them be able to actually consume forage. And how a cow's going to graze, she's going to wrap her tongue around it, bring it into her mouth, and then she's going to chew. Well, if she's missing teeth, this is obviously going to be a problem. If she's missing a tooth or if she don't have any teeth, it's going to cause problems with her body condition. And you'll see these cows that are broke mouth cows or smooth mouth cows, typically they're going to be down there in that 4 or less in a body condition, especially if we just wean a springborn calf off of her right here in the time frame and in this fall time frame. Another reason to cull these cows is if they're out of the calving season, and that goes back to that something I mentioned a while ago. If you got that 150-day calving season, if you're looking to get down to that 120-day calving season, anything for in that last 30 days of the calving season, she would be one we want to cull. You'll have the opportunity to sell her as a bred cow, so that's obviously going to put a little extra dollars on her for you there. So here's some reasons right here on this slide why we want to consider culling these cows, or things, management techniques that will help us be able to help make these management decisions to cull these cows. Some considerations to think about here. What do you do if you have a lot of cows check open? I'm going to use this scenario if you have 30 cows out there. And let's say last year in 2019, you bought some bred heifers last fall, and you calved them out, 30 of them, in February and March of this year in 2020. You put a bull back in with them in the end of April, 1st of May to have them calve again in February for 2021. You're weaning those calves off of them this week. You run them through the chute, and being that they're first calf heifers, we put, there's a lot she's got to do in her first year having a calf. She's got to have that calf, raise it, and get bred back all in the same year. There's a lot of them that can do it, but there's some of them that have a difficult time with doing it. So you've got 30 of them. You're checking 30 of them this week. 15 of them break check open. Now, that's a lot lower number than what we would expect, or what research would show us is what we can expect. But, we'll look at the extreme right here, because I'm trying to kind of help you with some considerations, some management decisions with this presentation. So if you have 50% of them check open, and again, that's the extreme, what do? They're young cows. Well, the first thing I want to look at is, do we have extra pasture to go with on these cows? Because we don't want to just up and cull 50% of the herd because they come up open. So some options that we want to look at. I mean, that's going to be a hit to the pocketbook right there, pretty hard, because that cow probably going into calving was probably a body condition score of a 6. We hope weaning this calf off, she's probably dropped down to about a 4.5 on her body condition score. And so when you go sell her as an open cow, you're gonna take a significant hit on that. So do you have extra pasture to go with these cows? If so, maybe we consider splitting those cows up and we have a spring calving bunch and a fall calving bunch. It's more work on you as a manager. And so if you've got extra pasture to go with them, maybe we take those open cows over to another pasture and we put a bull in on them December the 1st and make a fall calving bunch out of them. Then over time, we may work both of them into a consolidation of a winter calving group to start calving in December. Could be done, it would take time. And so I'm just kind of going over some real life scenarios right here to kind of help you make the decision. Now, let's say if you got 30 of those cows and you come in there and you hit the perfect thing that we would expect, you have 10% of them that check open. Well, that'd be 3 head. You know, that'd be amazing. What we want to do is we want to go ahead and cull those 3 head out. We want to go ahead and sell those cows. And I'll show you what the numbers look like here in just a little bit. If you keep them around, they're going to cost you money. Another scenario, let's just say if you've got 20% of those cows that end up checking open. Well, out of that original 30, that's going to put you, I believe, right there at 6 that would check open on that. And so, you know, we kind of look at the budget and see what it says to do, but research is going to tell us to go ahead and cull those 6 cows right there, and let's only keep the bred cows. Talk about some numbers here, and I'm going to talk about, before we get into this, I want to talk about the difficulties of that. What we see a lot of time is some attachment that comes along with these cows. You got to look at that cow, whether if you raised her and she's out of your favorite cow, or if you bought her and you've had her for 6 years, she's the first cow up whenever you call them. She's the first cow in the pen. You know, and we hear of these things on why people don't want to sell a cow if she checks open. And she's going to cost you money if you keep her around. And you've got to look at that cow as if you're owning a business, she's an employee of yours. And many times I hear from people and they want their cattle operation to be a business for them, whether if it's 5 cows or if you've got 1,000 cows out there, you've got to operate this deal as a business. Because if we're keeping them around and they're not raising a calf for us, they're simply costing us money. So I want to put it into perspective for you here, what that money actually looks like. These are real life numbers today. So a cow is going to consume about 2% of her body weight in forage on a daily basis. So that equates to about 28 pounds per day of forage that they're going to eat. And we're looking at this based on a 1,400-pound cow in this scenario. You know, depending on her pregnancy status or her lactation status, if she's got a calf in the first 90 days of lactation and we're calving during the winter, she's probably going to consume more than 28 pounds a day. Or if she's right there at late gestation, right there when we're feeding hay, probably going to consume more than 28 pounds per day. But for sake of example here, 2% of her body weight on a 1,400-pound cow, 28 pounds of hay per day. Averaging our hay out around the county this year, I realize that there's more expensive hay than $50 a roll, and I realize there's cheaper hay than $50 a roll. But for the sake of example, we're going to use that as our average right here. Most of our hay, a lot of people are going to be utilizing the 4x5, 4x5.5 bales. We don't see a lot of the 5x6 bales, those big 1,250-pound bales. We don't see a lot of those bales nowadays. Not saying that we don't have them. We've got producers and hay producers, custom hay balers that do have those 5x6, 1,250-pound bales. But for sake of example here, we're going to use this 900-pound bale. A 900-pound bale at a $50 bale of hay, that's going to mean that it's going to be just a little over 5 cents per pound. So we multiply that out at 28 pounds per day. That cow for the feeding season is going to cost us $1.54 per day. Typically, our hay feeding season on the average is going to be about 120 days. Some of you may be less than that. It's so great. Some of you may be more than that. But at 120 days, it's going to cost us $184.80 to feed this cow through the feeding season. Given the quality of our hay, you know, if we're feeding more than $50 a bale hay, you know, I would expect not to have to supplement any feed along with that. If we're feeding less than $50 a bale hay, we're probably going to have to be supplementing some feed along with that. So just for the average here, if we're feeding 2 pounds of cubes to that cow to supplement what that hay can't give her, if we're buying cubes, 20-pound or 20% range cubes at $9 a bag, that's going to equate to 36 cents per day. So at $9 a bag, it'd be 18 cents a pound. And then 2 pounds, 36 cents a day. So for a 120-day feeding season, at minimum, this cow's supplementation cost on feed is going to be $43.20. I kind of put some numbers all together right here on our vaccination costs. So vaccination, deworming, getting those cows pregnancy tested, and our vet costs, it's going to average out to about $25 a year on these cows. And then if we're feeding mineral like we're supposed to, the mineral, if it's $23 a bag, that's going to put us at about 46 cents per pound on our mineral. Consumption rate on the minimum is going to be about 3 ounces a day. So that's going to put us at 0.084 cents per day for mineral cost on these cows. As you can see, it's really cheap to feed mineral, even though per bag it may seem expensive. Per day, when you dollar it out per day on a cow, it's extremely cheap and something that we should not be cutting out. $30.66 per year is what it's going to cost to feed this cow mineral. So you add all those together, and this isn't counting spraying our pastures for weeds, fertilizing our pastures. If you've got any lease pasture, if you're figuring your lease rate into your annual cow cost, just with these things that I have mentioned right here, that cow's cow cost is going to be $283.66 to keep her around, to allow her to breed again next spring whenever we put those bulls in. So she's not going to breed until next spring. She's going to be open up until then, going to be costing us almost $300 to keep her around. Then if she breeds, let's say we turn bulls in May the 1st, to keep her around to have a calf for 2022, that means at minimum, she's going to cost us $567.32. And again, that's not counting, we like to figure in our pasture management cost on that annual cow cost, because we like for the cows to be able to pay for the things that we're doing out there on the property. Also, if you've got some lease rates, we like to include that in too, but some people won't count it in on their cow cost. So if you don't, at minimum, she's costing you over $550 to keep her around until she's going to have a calf again. That's not to mention if anything goes wrong with her during that time frame. So cost analysis is huge, and this goes back to, and all of you on here have probably heard me say this before, but as managers of cattle, we've got to pull out our sheets of paper and our pencils and our calculator and figure out. Sometimes it's intimidating. We're like, we don't want to know what she's costing us to keep her around. Sometimes we don't want to know those things. But when it comes to making management decisions on these cows, especially in the case of an open cow or a broke mouth cow or a smooth mouth cow, we've got to know what they're costing us, because as you can see, they're not cheap to keep around. So drawing this to a conclusion for you here, pregnancy testing these cows, pregnancy checking these cows is going to save you a lot of money. Just knowing if a cow's, don't let your eyes try to tell the story for you. Don't sit out there and look at her and say, well, based on her looks, based off of her looking pretty conditioned, based off of the size of her udder, I think she's bred. Don't go off that, because a cow that's open is going to be one of your best fleshing cows out in the pasture. And she's going to get this udder fat that's going to develop too. So don't go off the eye test to determine the pregnancy status. Let a vet get an arm inside these cows, draw blood on them, get an ultrasound machine inside them, do one of them, because if that cow's open and you cull her based on that open status, you just saved almost $600. Put that back in your pocket. Not to mention the salvage value you're going to get on this cow. You know, up until this point, we've had some pretty good, our cull cows have been bringing pretty good here at the market. And so, you know, those higher yielding slaughter cows, you know, they've been up there right now in this time frame, right? You know, into August up till the first part of September. You know, them higher yielding ones, they've been bringing up in the 60-cent range. Lower yielding cows, they'll test down there, you know, in the upper 40s, low 50 range. But, you know, that's what they've been better than what they've been bringing in the past. So, you know, we've had higher price per pound rates on these cull cows. So your salvage value on this cow is going to be pretty decent right now in the time that we're doing this presentation. Don't let $6 to $8 a pregnancy test per head determine your loss. And we've gone over those numbers for you. We can increase revenue through a controlled calving season. You know, one thing I didn't talk about here on this presentation today is the advantages of having a controlled calving season. First and foremost, you create a uniformity within that calf crop. You know, if we have a lot of calves that are born within a 60, 80-day time frame, those calves are going to be similar in weight and they're going to be similar in size. When we get into that 150-day calving season, going back to that bar chart that I was showing you, you saw that front end of that calving season. I think them 8-month-old calves was 560 pounds. Then you got down to them 4-month-old calves and they were 380-something pounds. That's a big variation in weight and size of those calves. And so whenever we start looking at the average of what those calves bring, we're actually pulling the average weight down. And so those calves are going to bring less. We get that average weight up, calves are going to bring more for us. And it's going to allow a buyer on those calves to be able to give more money if they can get more calves bought at one time. So we can increase our revenue through those controlled calving seasons. Any questions that you may have, I'll be happy to answer it for you. One thing I want to mention here at the end of as you see on this slide here, check us out on Facebook, YouTube. We do podcasts every week of our recorded radio programs, and we upload those on a website called Anchor, and then Anchor distributes those out through these different podcast sites such as Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. You can find us on all of these platforms at Fannin County Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. On any of those that I have listed right there, if you'll just type in the search engine Fannin County Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, you'll be able to find all our information on that. With that, I am going to